Full time here at St James's Park. Newcastle United won 3-0 against Benfica in the Champions League to really take control of their destiny in the competition. Just spoke to Anthony Gordon and Harvey Barnes after what was a really professional performance. I think the big thing for me, and I'm going to reflect this in my piece for 442 tomorrow, is that 2 years ago, 2 defeats in the 3 Champions League games at St James's Park was really their undoing in that competition. They really need to show, I think, development this season, and Eddie Howe's mentioned that coming into the campaign. Big thing was these non-emotional occasions where Barca is a massive occasion, PSG was a massive occasion. It was about winning the games that they were expected to win. Like 2 years ago, losing to Dortmund when a lot of people expected Newcastle to win that game, and AC Milan in the last game when they had it all to do and they were undone because they were chasing it. Then Nous just wasn't there. It really showed, I think, today that they have developed and they have become a better team in that regard this season. Anthony Gordon told me that after the game. He said that this wasn't maybe to the people on the outside as big of a game as Barca, but they needed to really come and show that they could win those games. I always remember Jose Mourinho actually 10 years ago coming here with Chelsea and losing and saying in the press conference afterwards that Newcastle only really turn up for the games on the TV when the cameras are around, and when the big occasions there, Newcastle and St James's Park can really raise itself, and that can take them over the line. Those big emotional games, very few teams do them better than St James's Park and Newcastle, but it's more about picking up where they need to when the pressure is more on in a different sense, when they're favourites, when there's a job to do and they have to go and do it. And that's exactly what Newcastle United did tonight. They're absolutely wonderful in their execution in the second half. Obviously the headlines will be taken by Nick Pope and that ridiculous assist, that absolutely brilliant throw out, and Anthony Gordon said after the game that he didn't think that he had it in his locker. I think in truth Newcastle rode their luck at times in the first half. Obviously Luka Bacchio hitting the post with that fantastic effort in the first half, and Pavlidis hitting the side netting and them getting through and targeting Dan Burn. I think as well Nick Pope's kicking was questionable once again as well. Overall I think Newcastle bounced back in the second half much better and found their feet, and the Champions League destiny is now in a much stronger position. It now looks a lot healthier, because I said in Brussels that they really need to win that game to have a great chance of taking the initiative, and they did that. They needed to then back that up with a win here, and they've done that now. If they can beat Athletic Club as well, and that's 9 points from a possible 12, and I think that's a dream position for Newcastle, and it takes the pressure off going to Leverkusen, takes the pressure off going to Marseille and PSG. With PSV Eindhoven back here as well, there are some big opportunities to take in the Champions League off the back of really disappointing performance and result against Brighton. I think the changes were really interesting. I said in the preview that I didn't think Sandro Tonali should play, and he didn't. I think Jacob Ramsey came in and did fairly well in the first half, particularly. He was always looking forward, linking really well with Anthony Gordon, and Jacob Murphy on the other side was absolutely fantastic as well. Anthony Gordon said a lot of really good things about him. His link up with Bruno Guimaraes was really impressive, and Nick Voltemade obviously knitting it all together. It all felt a lot more fluid and a lot better, and a big question that both Harvey Barnes and Anthony Gordon were asked by the journalists in the mix zone was, why is it that it works in the Champions League but it hasn't quite clicked in the Premier League? No goals or assists in the Premier League, but they've been scoring hatfuls in the Champions League in the last 2 games. Both Gordon and Barnes, and Elanga obviously had that really good performance in Belgium. Hasn't been able to improve on that in the Premier League and really find that consistency, but it'll come, I'm sure, for all of them, and this is a really good marker for them. But this was more about the mentality. I think Benfica were always going to be a difficult proposition. No points in the Champions League so far, obviously. Jose Mourinho being here, and obviously all the talk about Sir Bobby Robson, all that sort of romantic stuff before the game. It was all a facade. He was really going to come here and make life difficult. Benfica are a really experienced Champions League team, and Newcastle have come unstuck against similar opposition in Dortmund and Milan before. Obviously better teams maybe, but it's about the nous and the experience. And I think in the first half you saw that Benfica had that, with the way that they targeted Dan Burn on the left with Luka Bacchio, the way that they targeted Nick Pope's kicking, and the Pavlidis getting in on the shoulder, and the sort of tricks that they got up to, the bench really sort of getting involved in the sort of typical Jose Mourinho way. And Anthony Gordon again was really complimentary of that. He said that it was wonderful that Jose Mourinho gave him a compliment at the end. He said he was too much to handle, and he was. I thought it was a really good performance. He was rightly the man of the match, and that really counteracted though what was a difficult opposition in Benfica. I think Benfica were a better team than the result showed tonight. They had their moments in the first half, but it was about Newcastle coming and doing the business, away from the big emotional games, away from those moments where it's all about history, it's all about the iconic games. It was never going to be iconic tonight. It was just about doing a job, getting it done, and that's what Newcastle United did. There'll be more from me tomorrow from my office to fully debrief the game. These are my instant thoughts, and there's going to be a piece in 442.
Back in my office, it's the morning after the night before. Newcastle United were far too strong for Benfica, and they're up to 7th as I sit here now in the Champions League table. They have taken their campaign by the scruff of the neck in Europe, and they need to do that more in the Premier League. As I said yesterday, it was really interesting speaking to Anthony Gordon and Harvey Barnes, and them not really having an answer for why there's such inconsistencies in the Premier League and the Champions League, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on the Fulham game, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the coming days. But I wanted to focus on one or two things that I didn't get a chance to speak about yesterday, and one was, I mentioned Jacob Ramsey, but I thought he was underrated in this game, really. I thought he progressed the ball at every opportunity. He offers something so different to the other midfielders, and I think the difference between last season and the season before is the quality level of him off the bench against Joe Linton. I think he's better than Joe Linton at certain things. I think Ramsey can offer something different. I think that is really important. I think Joe Linton, the thing that I just said on the True Faith review that we just done this morning was that it matters. It needs to matter when players are poor. It needs to have consequences. Joe Linton was poor for mitigating circumstances, yes, against Brighton. Elanga was poor against Brighton. Now Jacob Murphy, who I thought was absolutely wonderful as well, and Jacob Ramsey have come in and performed at a level that means that those players need to up their game the next time they come in. They need to see that they have to win their shirt back. It can't just be that they will get another opportunity in the next game. I think that's the important thing to say. But yeah, quickly on Lewis Miley. The one concern I have is that he doesn't seem to have definition in his game. He sort of seems to play as a number 6, seems to play as a number 8. And Eddie Howe said after the game that he can be anything that he wants. I think that the important thing's got to be that there's definition in that for going forward, because we've spoken a lot about Elliot Anderson in recent weeks. And the fact that Anderson played on the left for Newcastle, played in midfield a little bit, didn't really have a defined position, was a sort of jack of all trades, kind of worked against him because he didn't have the confidence from Eddie Howe or in himself to usurp one of those players in that midfield area or Gordon on the left. It was always going to be difficult for him to do that anyway, but you've seen what happened to him at Nottingham Forest. The definition in his game, becoming that sort of number 6 who can play a number 8 but mainly a number 6, which he never was at Newcastle, has helped him reach levels where he's now probably England's first choice in that position ahead of a World Cup, and that's such a massive rise in his game. Nobody's surprised that he had the quality to do that, but he's been given the game time and the trust and has the confidence in himself and the definition in his game to do that. I think Lewis Miley needs the same, because otherwise you risk having a similar situation where he doesn't fulfil his potential at Newcastle. And yes, Elliot Anderson's move was forced, but Eddie Howe sort of said that he needed to leave anyway to find that level. Hopefully that isn't the same case for Lewis Miley, because I thought he was really good last night, recycling the ball, didn't try enough in terms of maybe risky passes, and I think he needs that that's his next level. He needs to take the game more by the scruff of the neck and show how good he is and have more confidence in his ability, but he's only 19, that'll come, I'm sure, but he needs that definition in his game, in my opinion. That's the big concern I have for him, is watching what happened to Elliot Anderson. Yeah, and again, the caveat is Elliot Anderson had to leave for different reasons, but the fact that he's been such a good player for Forest with the definition of his game and the development of his game, Miley isn't quite getting that at Newcastle, and you don't want to see another local lad who's come through an academy that's not had a history of brilliant local lads coming through leaving and having the same thing happen to him, because he's more than capable of doing that. And then it also needs to be contingency plans in midfield with Joe Linton getting older. Tonali's contract, if that doesn't get re-signed, then his future's going to be up in the air. There needs to be a contingency plan. You'd love it to be Lewis Miley, but there needs to be more definition in his game, I think, for him to find that confidence and that run of consistency. There will be games for him this season. I think if he could start against Spurs next week, Athletic in the Champions League in a couple of weeks, West Ham as well. There's lots of games that he's good enough to start in, and I think it's great that he has played like this, and Ramsey as well, and that midfield is really a hotbed of consistency at the moment. When one player doesn't play well, another one comes in and does really well. And the same thing out wide for Jacob Murphy to take that role from Anthony Elanga, and also Harvey Barnes do that. I think Harvey Barnes is a different case because he's playing on the wrong side for him, and also he tends to come off the bench and have an impact, whereas when he starts it doesn't go so well. I still think Elanga is probably ahead of Barnes in the pecking order for now, but Jacob Murphy is definitely that number one at the moment off the back of that. Brilliant to speak to Anthony Gordon as well. I thought he was absolutely fantastic in the second half. And the other thing is the tactical evolution of Newcastle. I said about the mentality evolution, but the fact that they didn't, run after Benfica from the start. They allowed Benfica to settle into the game, and they got some joy out of that. Luca Bacchio, as I said, did have a run at Dan Burn, and that comes from the fact that the midfield isn't as energetic and isn't as intense and lets the ball through a little bit more. We've spoken about it so many times, but I thought that Newcastle managed the game quite well. They got a little bit lucky with the Luca Bacchio hitting the post and a couple of opportunities, but in the second half they took the game by the scruff of the neck and showed that they belong in the Champions League, and that is really the definition for me. It's the growth in this team, that they look like they belong. That's exactly what Eddie Howe wanted, and that's exactly what he got. Thanks so much for joining me. Like, share and subscribe. There'll be player ratings out on Patreon tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't do a preview of the game from pitch. I got there a little bit late and the music was already on. It was already a bit difficult to do that. So there will be more Patreon content, $4.99 after a 7-day free trial, in the description below. You can also join me as a supporter, get ad-free versions of these videos for $2.99 a month. Or if you'd just like to like, share and subscribe, I'm absolutely happy for you to do that as well. So thanks so much for all your support, and I'll see you to preview Fulham in a couple of days. Cheers.